basically, my presentation, the purpose of it was to uncover the queerness within Russian history. So I was planning on making a short documentary film using interviews with regular Russian people, professors, and intellectuals to uncover queer history that's been erased within Russian history, and ultimately to understand how the anti-LGBT climate of today in Russia still survives, and really how it came to fruition. So Russia has a lot of historical queerness, and you're going to see this phrase keep popping up throughout my presentation because, as I've learned, Russia is actually super gay. So before the Tsars, the Eastern Orthodox Church repressed homosexuality through their anti-gay interpretations of religious text. That's something we see often throughout cultures, is religion kind of screwing things up for gay people. Ivan the Terrible was actually married 7 times. However, there are lots of stories of that are, I guess a lot of Russians think of them today as rumors if they even know them, and they talk about his attraction to young men in female attire. And in his novel Serебryany Prince, which means Silver Prince, A.K. Tolstoy wrote about a character named Fyodor, who was a, quote, capable military commander, the scheming initiator of murderous political purges, the Tsar's bed partner, and an effeminate homosexual who discussed in public the cosmetics he used to improve his complexion and hair. So there's quite a bit of juxtaposition in traditional gender roles with this person in history. So there was lots of legislation in response, and when we were looking at Weimar Germany, we kind of see the same things happen where gay people exist, and then people finally catch on to the fact that gay people exist, and people are like, no gays, go back into the closet. So Peter the Great, God, what a dude. He wanted to modernize Russia in 1716, and so he banned homosexual activity between men in the military. However, extending this ban to civilians, so non-military people, was opposed until 1835. Tsar Nicholas I added Article 955 in 1832, and this criminalized anal sex between men, but oral sex was still legal. And those who broke this law were actually stripped of their rights and forced to work in Siberian camps for 4 to 5 years. So it isn't to say that this law was great, because it definitely wasn't, and it carried with it very harsh penalties. Next, my favorite part of Russian history, the Russian Revolution in 1917. So on the right, there's Papa Lenin, as you can all see. Love this guy. In 1917, the Russian Revolution brought about a drastic change in leadership. Lenin attempted to rid Russia of its Tsarist leadership and legalized no-fault divorce, abortion, and homosexuality, which were all previously crimes in Tsarist Russia. And an openly gay person could actually serve in this early Soviet government. We don't often think of Russia as a very progressive place. But when you look back in terms of things like racial history and in terms of things like sexual orientation and gay history, there was a point in which Russia was showing some hint of becoming a progressive nation. So what changed? In the 1930s, Stalin assumed power and needed to gain followers of the corrupt establishment of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And so he basically was trying to cozy up to all these church officials by trying to appeal to their sense of morality. And so basically, in 1933, Article 121 was passed, and it made homosexuality a crime, punishable by 5 years in labor camps. And this was repealed in 1993. So that's how long this lasted. And it's a very important piece of information to understand when we're talking about Russia, because these laws have just persisted for such a long time that Russia's progress has in some way been stunted just purely based on these laws staying for so long. The Stalinist government actually attempted to link homosexuality with the decadent elitist Tsarist aristocracy and even with fascism. So, and this is what we see throughout history with different power schemes. Like officials want to stay in power, and so they will try to find some group to marginalize and oppress and link them to things that are way worse than the group actually is to gain power. And this is definitely, it's not unique to Russia. And additionally, this law was enacted under the guise of protecting the youth, which is very important once we look in the more recent future. So then there was Khrushchev. Stalin's death in 1953 caused Nikita Khrushchev to step into power. He liberalized the Stalinist ideas around marriage, divorce, and abortion, so we're back to Lenin times now. Stalin's ideas surrounding homosexuality spreading throughout society as it did in prisons, and so Khrushchev sent a secret memo out to police that basically told them to imprison thousands of innocent gays and lesbians. So this idea, the Stalinist idea, definitely still persisted for a long time. And 1993 was actually a pretty big year for gay people in Russia because not only was Act 22 repealed, but Russia declassified homosexuality as a mental illness following the lead of the World Health Organization, which basically stated the same thing 3 years earlier in 1990. So you're telling me that Russia is gay? I need proof. Boom. Oh, I'm not done yet, folks. This is just beginning. So, oftentimes when we think about like gay history, we think of it in the abstract, but in reality, as we can see with various different world cultures, lots of the famous cultural figures have actually been gay. For example, there was Pyotr Tchaikovsky. He was born on May 7th, 1840 in Vatkinsk, Russia, and died November 6th, 1893 in St. Petersburg, one of my favorite cities. He was a famous 19th century composer. Actually, his Romeo and Juliet composition is playing right now at the Schnitz. And he also composed the ballets of Swan Lake and the Nutcracker and Sleeping Beauty, and even his opera Eugene Onegin. The Russian culture minister actually denies his queerness, and there is no mention of it made in the movie about his life. I guess this isn't surprising if you know about like the political climate in Russia right now, but just to kind of show you that this guy probably was gay or at least queer, he was married to his wife Antonia Murikovna, and he confessed that he couldn't reciprocate her love, but that he would be her lifelong friend, and the marriage unsurprisingly ended really quickly after that. Who would have known? There was Sergei Eisenstein. He was born on January 22nd, 1998, and died on February 11th, 1948. He was a film pioneer, so anybody who's like into film will probably know of him. And he experimented with montage in his works. And he was married to a woman until 1948 when he died. Yet when his diaries were uncovered, it basically discussed his homosexual desires for many men, including his assistant Grigory. So there were works that he created also covered the lives of other queer people in Russia, such as Ivan the Terrible, who I mentioned in my second slide, and Alexander Nevsky. And then there was Mikhail Kuzmin. You might read his works at some point or another, and he was born on October 8th, 1872, and died on March 1st, 1936. And he was a prominent contributor to the Russian Silver Age of poetry. So he was a famous poet, he was a musician and a novelist, so just an overall artsy guy who contributed a lot to Russian culture. And his famous novel Wings, it's very good, in my opinion, and it was published in 1906, and it was sort of a coming out novel for Kuzmin, and very revolutionary for its time period especially, but just a beautiful piece of literature. And he's loved by many Russians to this very day. So the impact of these three figures on Russian history extends beyond queer history, but nobody even discusses the fact that these people were queer, and that is part of essentially just a power move to continually oppress gays, so the government of the Russian Federation can just get more power. That's how power works in any nation. Groups are marginalized so that they can be pitted against other groups, so that the power and the ruling class can just have the most power. So the skeleton in the closet, being gay in Putin's Russia. As you can imagine, and as you may have heard, is not a fun thing. On June 11th, 2013, Putin enacted the Gay Propaganda Act, which prohibits public positive displays of homosexual identities in places available to minors. It's kind of the same idea as what was happening with Stalin, who basically wanted to protect the youth. So this law prohibits anything from public displays of affection where minors are. Gay bars are still allowed under this law because minors are not allowed in them. But anything from like PDA to protesting homophobic laws in places where there are minors falls under this law, and the most common punishments are fines. So sometimes you'll face jail time, but most of the time you'll just face fines. So these are the kind of some of the protests. So what's left in my project? So my project is a year-long thing. And after I began to do some research, my project kind of took a turn. At first, I wanted to see the debate surrounding homosexuality unfold throughout Russia's history. And then I wanted to find queerness in Russia's people. But now I'm finding myself interested in the language and the wording and the rhetoric surrounding the gay propaganda law signed by Putin, considering the use of propaganda against US imperialism in the Soviet Union was definitely a thing that we all know. Like, let's just look at, there's Russian propaganda all over these walls. And so I wonder if this phrase holds significance in our understanding of why Russia's LGBT rights movement is progressing in the specific way that it is. By the end of semester 2, I will compile all this information and interviews with some professors, such as a family friend of mine who, his name is Evgeny Burstein, and he was born in Russia, and he is a professor at Reed College, and I'm going to make it into a short film. So my final thought so far is that while we may consider Russia's new anti-gay propaganda act to be backwards and antithetical to progress and progressiveness, we must understand that progress is never linear. If we look to anything in history that has been sustainable, it is always, even revolutions, there are still some bits of 5 steps forward and 3 steps back types of things. Russia's history is one full of dramatic revolutions and switches of power and systems of government, which is something that in America we cannot even begin to imagine. We've had different presidents, but Russia has had just entirely different switches of power in a very short period of time. And so, from the very first switch in power, life for LGBT people and queer people as a whole has been certainly improved since the beginning of Russia. Russia has a very rich queer history that needs to be uncovered, and calling it a homophobic country really just doesn't do justice to the queer folks and their allies of these queer folks and the queer folks in history who've made Russia what it is today. So we really need to kind of understand the difference between the individual Russian people and the Russian government, and understand that we can't just make these bold assertions about a country that's halfway across the world without understanding how progress shows up throughout time. Thank you.
Who's next?
Stopping this button.
Go ahead.